10 days after one of the deadliest weekends in America's losing battle against gun violence, Donald Trump's message to America: enough about you. Let's get back to me and my insults for cable news hosts, paper straws, and the Clintons. Donald Trump weaving one of the most bizarre counter-narratives of his presidency with an elaborate distraction campaign possibly designed to keep us from talking about his hypocrisy and inaction on common-sense gun reform and the intersection of his racist rhetoric and the uptick of domestic terrorism. It's also a sign of political weakness. Presidents in a strong position at this point in their presidency, think Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, are able to focus on expanding their coalition, not exclusively on shoring up the base. It's a political luxury that Donald Trump cannot afford. Washington Post reports today, quote, "From straws to wind turbines to socially conservative issues, Trump is deliberately amplifying public tensions by seizing on divisive topics to energize his base." That's according to campaign aides and White House advisors. Trump also clearly getting cold feet on the gun reforms he promised just last week, already passing the buck today to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I am convinced that Mitch wants to do something. I've spoken to Mitch McConnell. He's a good man. He wants to do something. He wants to do it, I think, very strongly. He wants to do background checks, and I do too.
Call Mitch. But with public anxiety about gun violence and public support for legislation on the rise, Democrats were prepared for Trump's walkback on guns. Washington Post also reports this, quote, "In a bid to keep pressure on the White House to respond to mass shootings, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is preparing to ask that President Trump withdraw requests for $5 billion in border wall funding and redirect the money toward programs that aim to reduce gun violence and white supremacist extremism." Senator Schumer, in a statement, claims, quote, "The dual scourges of gun violence and violent white supremacist extremism in this country are a national security threat, plain and simple. And it's time the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress start treating them as such." And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us from the Washington Post, White House reporter Ashley Parker. With us on set, former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards, former Republican Congressman, now an independent, David Jolly, and another heavyweight, former elected official, Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill. Wow. I got to start with you because I spent a lot of my political career at odds politically and rhetorically with Senator Schumer. But in terms of these twin scourges of gun violence and a rise in domestic white supremacy and the intersection of that and domestic terrorism, as Christopher Wray, Donald Trump's handpicked FBI director, testified to last month, he's spot on.
He is, and he is expressing an urgency and directing the urgency at Mitch McConnell, which is understandable. I would suggest the urgency needs to go even broader to both sides of the Capitol and to both parties, and here's why. What we saw in the most recent 3 mass shootings, if you count the Garlic Festival, and every mass shooting before, was a failure of government. Our government failed to keep our community safe. To address that failure, legislation is required. And unfortunately, the legislation sitting in the Senate would not address the failure of government we just saw. The background check bill, while noble and good and a good advancement, would not address it. We know that the shooter in Dayton, the shooter in El Paso, each passed the background check bill. So yes, we need to expand background checks to all transactions, unlicensed gun show transactions, internet transactions. But the reality is, we're not seeing the urgency that actually addresses this failure of government. As it's been said around this table, if these were brown-skinned Muslim Americans that killed this many people on domestic soil, we would have a special session of the Congress. The president would be addressing the nation in prime time, and we would have a comprehensive, sweeping reform package. So my question for Republicans and Democrats: what are we doing on assault weapons and weapons of war? What are we doing on high-capacity magazines? What are we doing to incorporate non-prosecuted law enforcement encounters? What are we doing to incorporate into background checks mental health counseling services that may not rise to the level of reporting by the mental health counselor, but that we know include ideations of violence? This is very difficult. I'm not suggesting it's easy. But if there's urgency to be felt, if your issue is not Republican or Democrat, but it's how do we keep our community safe and address gun reform, we're not meeting the test in Washington at all. Zero. And my fear is Democrats, in offering this as the foundational bill to say Republicans work with us on this, we're setting up an incremental reform that will allow everybody to take a victory lap, but it won't change anything substantive.
Let me just disagree with one tiny thing. It's not difficult. I mean, after 9/11, we treated that attack as a war that came to our shores, and we changed everything. So if we, and let me just say this about Republicans, if you need any evidence of their racism, take their different treatment of white terrorists and Muslim terrorists.
That's it.
That's all. The case closed.
The power of leadership to set national priorities, right? Immigration polls is a #1 issue out there right now because the president has wrapped it in xenophobia and fear. If a political leader can step forward and say, our fear should be easy access to guns. It's not violent video games. It's not mental health in and of itself. It's not these hate platforms. It's that people who face these challenges in these environments have easy access to firearms. That's the pressing national security issue we face. Then the nation's attention will be drawn there. We're not seeing it. I have been critical on this show of House Democratic leadership on the issue of impeachment. I think they should have brought the Congress back. They should express urgency on the matter. Same thing. And I would just say an opportunity missed. Suppose House Democrats had returned this week and said, we're moving an assault weapons ban and a high-capacity magazine restriction. We're opening up the mental health conversation.
And how about a Patriot Act for white terrorism?
At least the eyes of the nation would be drawn to that and not the president's tweet that further empowers the white nationalism that has allowed and contributed to moments like this.
Ashley Parker, I want to bring you in. You've got 4 stories I wanted to ask you about, and I have to start with the oldest, which is the one you wrote yesterday about how being a racist is a brand that Donald Trump doesn't really like. Why doesn't he then stop acting like a racist?
That's a good question. Look, the president's aides and allies will say he has the most natural reaction for someone who is not a racist being called a racist. He's deeply enraged. But as we point out in the story, some of President Trump's comments and behaviors have plainly been racist. There is a reason why he has been given that label, especially by his critics. And one of the things, if you look at President Trump's history, he has long sort of walked up to the line of sort of racially tinged or racially charged behavior dating back to the ad he took out against the Central Park Five and never sort of recanted or apologized for even after they were exonerated. And then he rose to political prominence on the racist lie of birtherism. And then I could point you to some of his tweets even just a month ago when he told those members of the squad, all 4 minority congresswomen, to go back from the countries they came from. And of course, 3 of them were actually born in the United States. So even though he's always walked up to it, for a while he has sort of been able to avoid this master brander, the brand of racist, or the dreaded R word. But now, because of some of his behavior and languages have been so plainly racist, it is threatening to stick to him, and that is going to be a challenge heading into 2020.
And then, Ashley, bring us through to what you've written today, which is about the president continuing to reveal his incredible vulnerability, obviously in his own view. His response to Charlottesville is something he feels so vulnerable about. He is today tweeting someone who's sort of giving him that right-wing cover of, well, he didn't really mean there were good people on both sides, when your piece points out that that's exactly what he meant, because it was a protest and counter-protest between neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and people protesting their presence.
Right. One of President Trump's political talents is his shamelessness. So, for instance, we've seen if someone accuses him of racism or calls him a racist, he will sort of take the charge and turn it back on them. And another talent is sort of his ambiguity and willingness to say just enough unclearly or just enough on all sides of every issue that he can then try to claim, well, I didn't actually do that. I didn't really say there were very fine people. I also, condemned white supremacists and white supremacy in the response to Charlottesville, which he did, it's worth noting, but it was under duress, it was under pressure from aides, and then it was something that sort of immediately afterwards, when he felt like he was facing criticism and he wasn't getting sufficiently fair media coverage and he wasn't getting lauded, and when he wanted a lot of praise, he then often retreats back to his sort of more nativist gut impulses, and those are the sorts of comments where he does say, for instance, in Charlottesville, there were very fine people on both sides.
Yeah, Donna, as Ashley said, it was also undermined by Donald Trump 3.0. I mean, I think there were 3 or 4 responses to Charlottesville, and I remember everyone distinctly. They all tended to happen around the 4 o'clock hour. And there was the one where he said good people on both sides, and I remember then Chief of Staff John Kelly, I think 2 or 3 chiefs of staff ago, with his head in his hands. I mean, he undermines himself by revealing his true racist nature.
Well, I think you only have to look at Donald Trump's Twitter feed, look at his statements that are not on a teleprompter, and that tells you everything that you need to know. And, when you have a majority of the American people now who believe that Donald Trump is a racist, that's where we are right now. And he can't really walk that back. And it's almost anything that he says, people, of course, are looking at that and they're reading into it, but I think it's well deserved. And as far as trying to do something about guns and what we do, calling Mitch McConnell and saying he's a good man and he wants to do the right thing, this is a moment that really does require a comprehensive response. And if we do it in piecemeal, once again, I'm not even convinced that can happen, but if we put this forward piecemeal, the American public is going to think that we've solved a problem that we haven't really solved.
Claire, I miss big leadership. And whatever you thought about President Obama and whatever you thought about George W. Bush, in the face of national tragedies, 9/11 and Newtown, they tried to do big things. We have 2 big, huge problems. We have an epidemic of gun violence, and we have a rising threat of domestic terrorism. And we have the smallest man in the Oval Office in the history of the country. What do we do?
Well, and we have 2 problems here. One is the gun problem, and one is the domestic terrorism problem. The domestic terrorism problem has been given short shrift for an awful long time. As the ranking member of that committee in the United States Senate, I couldn't even get the chairman to call hearings about the severity of the problem, even after Charlottesville.
Why not?
Because they want to ignore it. And by the way, billions have been spent. I think because I think it is a convenient political dead horse to beat if it's all about the Muslims. And it's more complicated when we start talking about domestic terrorism. And candid, if it's foreign terrorism, it's one thing in terms of what the rules of the road are. The rules are more difficult when you're dealing with American citizens. There are protections they have. But for whatever reason, the Republican Party has not taken domestic terrorism seriously, and the budget has been slashed. The number of contractors working on foreign terrorism, I couldn't even fill the room with the file boxes full of independent contractors working on this. There's literally almost no one working on domestic terrorism. But the gun thing, I got to go back, and I got to be a little bit downright snippy about this. With all due respect, there's only one party that has blocked gun safety in the United States Capitol, and it is not the Democrats. It is the Republican Party that has been in bed with the NRA financially and politically for decades. The notion that Nancy Pelosi needs to call the House back to do assault weapons when Mitch McConnell is owned by the NRA is absolutely not fair.
So let me ask you
and
this
wait,
question.
let me finish. Let me get this all out. There are 5 people that can move Mitch McConnell right now, and they ought to move them because they're going to be in trouble. They are Martha McSally. They are Cory Gardner, they are Joni Ernst, they are Tom Tillis, and they are, who's my last one?
The 5 vulnerable Republicans.
The 5 vulnerable Republicans.
The Democratic targets.
Susan Collins. I forgot Susan. Those 5 are the ones that are in the most trouble on this issue. And if those 5 senators go to Mitch, and because you know what Mitch wants more than anything? He wants the title majority floor leader. Sure. So if they go to him and they say, Mitch, we can't win if you do not give us a vote. And I get it that we want to do assault weapons. I voted for it. I get it. But if you can't even take the baby step of something that 97% of the country supports, that shows how corrupt your party has become in terms of owning the gun lobby. And I'm just not going to sit here and let the Democrats get blamed for not passing gun safety. Sorry, I had to get that off my chest.
Please, Claire,
I really like you.
Hash it out.
No, Claire.
I really like you, but I had to say that.
Look, Claire, I run into this all the time. Trust me. As a Republican who's harder on Nancy Pelosi about impeachment and guns than most Democrats are, I get the criticism. I understand. I share your condemnation of Republicans. I wish Mitch McConnell was not the majority leader, and I wish he would not stand in the way and obstruct on reasonable gun safety reform measures. What I will also say is in this moment, In this moment of national tragedy after 3 mass shootings, if a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives cannot pass an assault weapons ban, then forget about it.
Oh, they can pass it.
They can pass it.
Well, wait a minute.
That's
Hold on
actually
then.
not even a question.
Then why not?
I actually
Then
think
why
that
not?
now they could come back and have already had plans to. I mean, they have a task force that's been in place, that they could actually bring together a really strong package of gun reforms
I'm sure they will.
and send them over to the Senate. And I'm absolutely convinced that they will. The question is really, what will Mitch McConnell do, and what will Republicans tolerate? And on these issues, whether it's assault weapons or it's background checks, all the rest, these enjoy more than majority support in the country. And so Democrats are on the right stomping ground. And I think you're right. We have to call out a very weakened NRA for standing in the way, and for Republicans walking in lockstep with the National Rifle Association.
Can I just add, then let me ask you a question. I'm not a Republican, I'm an independent.
Okay.
And I left the Republican
I'm
Party
glad.
because I lost all faith in the Republican
Nicole
Party.
is giggling.
Right.
And very publicly,
It's a place to be.
and very publicly, I aligned with the Blue Wave Coalition in 2018 because I was desperate for a political party to show leadership in moments of national crisis. Most importantly, with this president in a moment of impeachment. Where the hell has Nancy Pelosi been on impeachment? Silent. Where is she on assault weapons ban? Silent. Where is she on high-capacity magazine restrictions? Why isn't the House back in session? Because she has the votes to do it. She has 235 Democrats. She can lose 17 people in safe districts, like a district that you or a state you represented. She can give up those 17 votes in the House. She can get to 218, and why not? If the answer is politics, and that's garbage. And you know what? People like me aren't going to be with Democrats in 2020 if we don't have something to believe in after putting our faith in the Democratic
Well,
Party
don't tell
in
me you're going to
2018.
vote for Donald Trump.
I'm not going to vote for Donald
Okay.
Trump. But you know what? I'm not putting a sign in my yard for the Democratic nominee if I'm not seeing any results out of a Democratic majority. I've never been more disappointed in a House Speaker than I've been since I put my
Well,
faith
I
in the
think you're
Democrats
being.
in
I
2018.
mean,
Well, we have
we're
2
gonna
votes
agree to
on this
disagree.
side for impeachment and for gun safety. So,
Well, I'm also for totally. I mean, as I said, I voted to ban assault weapons. I had an F from the NRA. They spent millions.
Why won't they
taking
bring
me
it
out.
up? Honest question.
you know
Why
what?
not
I
return to Washington and bring
you know
it
what?
up?
I think they will.
Give us 2 weeks, and they'll come back in
Well, then
session.
give McConnell 2 weeks.
They will
It's the
bring
same
it up.
standard.
Who's going to stand in the way in this next 2 weeks is going to be the NRA. They like nothing but to hold this window open so that they can continue to work the process.
And Trump's gotten
I
afraid
don't
of
think
his
the
base.
Democrats are going to allow them to do that. I don't think they're going to let this moment pass without bringing forward, especially high-capacity magazines, assault weapons ban, letting the Center for Disease Control do research. Those are really simple things that can be done. And I think, meeting the 9/11 moment when it comes to domestic terrorism. We revamped and stood up the Department of Homeland Security.
That's right.
Over this.
Well, let me just wrestle this question back and put it back to you guys. Do you share any of David's exasperation with Nancy Pelosi?
Oh, on impeachment, I absolutely do. I think that Democrats should have impeached Donald Trump and brought impeachment proceedings yesterday. I'm happy with them moving forward now, but I don't want them to waste this moment, because in the unforeseen circumstance, maybe foreseen for some, that Donald Trump should get reelected, there will be no holding this man accountable for the crimes that he has committed. And I think it's important to hold him accountable. And I don't think it's about waiting to see whether there can be a conviction in the United States Senate. Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, all impeachment proceedings that never went toward removal.
And I've talked a lot about the kinds of people that I talk to about the question of impeachment are national security figures, not people that know politics the way you do, especially swing state politics the way you do. You've lived it. But there are certain questions that are if X, then Y. If the president committed crimes in the Southern District of New York, as we know he did, if the president committed 10 acts of obstruction of justice, as we know he did, then Y equals impeachment.
Right. No, I think the Constitution demands it. And I think, for Democrats, if you want to talk politics, and I don't think that this question of impeachment is really about politics in that sense. It's a political question, but it's not about politics.
It's a political process.
It's a political process, and I think we have to proceed forward, and I think our Democratic base, frankly, is expecting us to proceed forward.
Ashley Parker, there's so much more of your White House reporting I want to get to, so let's just do a lightning round. We got carried away in the moment. So Anthony Scaramucci, someone who was one of the only people I had to drive from the table for my own sanity when he sat here, one of the most hardened defenders of Donald Trump for much of the Trump presidency, has had, I don't know what to describe it as, a moment of lucidity. He had this quote in the New York Times. "He's off the rails," Mr. Scaramucci said in an interview on Monday, and the honest people in the room know that he is crazy. I have heard this from other people in touch with the White House, that people in the room, people on this White House staff, are navigating a president who is, I mean, I guess I'll just stick with Scaramucci's words since they're on the record, that he's crazy. But they're navigating something dark. They're navigating something in Donald Trump that is unpredictable. They're back to watching his Twitter feed to understand how he's going to respond. What does your reporting this hour say about the state of this White House staff and their relationship to their principal?
Well, I don't think, going back to Scaramucci briefly, anyone is sort of ready to call him a profile in courage just yet. But I will say he is doing something that just about nobody else in the president's orbit has done, which belatedly he is coming out and he is publicly stating an opinion counter to the president and condemning the president. And he is saying, correctly, it's worth noting, there's a lot of people in the room who will say this privately, but I'm the only one out here sharing this publicly, and that's true. It's not necessarily that every White House official we talk to uses Scaramucci's word and calls the president crazy, but there are people in the White House and in the president's orbit who sort of express a scrambling helplessness when it comes to his tweets, who, when you ask them what happened in a senior staff meeting, recount, trying to reverse engineer policy after a comment or a social media missive from the president that they weren't expecting. And so what you have is Anthony Scaramucci coming out and sort of vocalizing some of that right now. But you do hear that bits and pieces from within the West Wing, and some of that is what manifests itself in leaks. People who are saying, I'm trying to manage the president, you're not going to believe what he is doing. But they all feel like they use the excuse of, I want to be in the room to try to help change the behavior. Although, of course, we've seen that the president is sort of beyond being shackled at this point in his life. Scrambling helplessness also describes what I understand to be the reaction to the president retweeting some of the conspiracy theories. And Business Insider has FBI agents livid that Trump amplifying BS theories about Jeffrey Epstein's death that have no basis in reality. One FBI agent told Insider that Trump's actions make the FBI's job harder as it combats homegrown extremism, particularly after its latest finding that conspiracy theories pose a new domestic terrorism threat. Again, in my muscle memory is that after 9/11, which was the government in which I worked, their experience with terrorism, a Patriot Act was passed. The right-left stuff quieted for a minute, and the laws changed. None of that, and on top of it, making it even more difficult for the FBI, a president retweeting unhelpful conspiracy theories. Ashley, any sense of anybody trying to tamp any of that down, or is hopelessness the real mindset there? Well, the majority of people in his White House on the whole do not like the retweeting of these conspiracy theories, although there are people in his world who also traffic in that world of conspiracy theories. These are the people who sort of put them in front of him and print out articles about them and show him tweets that he sometimes ends up retweeting. And this is a world in which President Trump is comfortable in. He has long trafficked in conspiracy theories. Birtherism is perhaps the most high profile and notable one, and it is sort of perpetually relevant because of its racist roots. But during the campaign, he suggested that Ted Cruz's father was perhaps culpable for the murder of JFK. So this is not new to this president, nor is it new to his staff, who at this point, again, kind of just shrugs, hopes it will go away, and understands it may be something they need to back manage after the fact. What a time to be alive, Claire. I don't even know what to say.
You can't make it up. It's just unbelievable.
How do you beat it?
Well, I think what we have to do is stay focused on the things that the majority of America is most concerned about. And he's busy worrying about his base. And believe me, everybody who's against the ban on assault weapons and everybody who's against universal background checks, they're all voting for Trump.
Right.
Okay? That's his base. On the other hand, we have a very strong base in our party. And you take the two bases together, and they're less than 50% of the vote. Yeah. And that's what we forget so often. We forget that the majority of people that will decide this presidential election don't claim either party. They're watching both sides and trying to figure out who is the most crazy, who is the most... Seriously. Well, it will be a binary choice, right? And both sides will try to make the other side look really bad. And so at the end of the day, it's who I'm most comfortable with in my living room, who do I believe has integrity. We're going to win that one. Who do I believe has ethics? We're going to win that one. Who tells the truth? I think we'll win that one. So if we don't screw this up, we should win.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.